It all started with an unassuming evening. Jake Harris, a 23-year-old tech enthusiast, was seated in his dimly lit room, his face illuminated by the cold glow of his computer screen. He had spent hours mindlessly scrolling through YouTube, jumping from one random video to another. His algorithm, often reliable for tech reviews and gaming highlights, suddenly presented something peculiar, a video titled Dark Planet. The thumbnail was plain yet unsettling, a blurry image of a desolate landscape bathed in shadows, with no description or tags visible. Jake hesitated for a moment. Something about the video felt wrong. But curiosity outweighed caution, as it always did. He clicked. The video opened with a low, vibrating hum. The screen showed what seemed to be a barren, alien planet, shrouded in eternal darkness. A faint red hue stretched across the horizon like a dying ember. The visuals were grainy, like footage pulled from an ancient VHS tape. Oddly enough, there was no narration, no music, just the eerie sound of distant wind. For the first few seconds, Jake assumed it was some obscure art project. But then, at precisely the 30-second mark, the first glitch appeared. The screen flickered violently, and for a brief moment, Jake saw something, a figure. It was humanoid but distorted, standing far in the background. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving Jake unsure if it had even been there. The video continued as though nothing had happened, showing more of the same desolate terrain, with occasional glitches interrupting the flow. "What the hell is this?" Jake muttered, leaning closer to the screen. He instinctively checked the video's description for context, but there was nothing, no credits, no explanation. The channel name was simply Transmission_3, a profile with 0 subscribers and no other videos uploaded. The more Jake explored, the stranger it became. Feeling a growing unease, Jake paused the video and decided to inspect its details. Right-clicking, he accessed the file's metadata. Oddly enough, the data wasn't what he expected. The upload date was listed as null, and the runtime kept fluctuating each time he checked, 321, then 319, then 323. It made no sense. But one line of text stood out, origin, unknown. Shrugging off the growing tension, Jake resumed the playback. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to keep watching. As the minutes ticked by, the glitches became more frequent, and the imagery more unsettling. Shadows seemed to move in unnatural ways, stretching and contorting as if alive. Then, at the 2:45 mark, something appeared in the foreground, a pair of glowing red eyes staring directly at the camera. Jake's stomach dropped. This was no ordinary video. The screen cut to black, leaving only the faint sound of static. Jake leaned back, exhaling sharply. He wasn't sure what he had just witnessed, but one thing was certain: this video was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Determined to understand what was happening, Jake refreshed the page, expecting the video to reappear. But it didn't. Instead, the page displayed an error message: "This content is no longer available." Confused, Jake checked his history, only to find no trace of Dark Planet. It was as though the video had never existed. Did I imagine it? Jake thought, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He decided to perform a quick Google search for the term Dark Planet. The results were disappointing: generic links to sci-fi books, movies, and forums, but nothing remotely related to what he had seen. Then, just as he was about to give up, his computer screen flickered, and an unfamiliar notification popped up. It was a direct message, sent to an account he didn't recognize. The username was a random string of numbers and letters. The message read, "You shouldn't have watched it. It sees you now." Jake froze. His hands trembled as he stared at the message. Before he could process what was happening, the message deleted itself, leaving no trace. From that moment on, Jake's sense of reality began to blur. That night, he dreamed of the planet from the video, its dark, barren surface stretching endlessly beneath a blood-red sky. In his dream, the humanoid figure from the glitch stood motionless, its glowing red eyes fixed on him. When Jake woke up in a cold sweat, he felt an unshakable urge to find that video again. He needed answers, no matter the cost. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that dark planet wasn't just a video, it was something alive, something aware. The next morning, as sunlight filtered weakly through his bedroom blinds, he sat at his desk, determined to uncover the truth. He scoured his browser history again. Nothing. It was as if the video had vanished into thin air. But Jake wasn't ready to give up. He tried searching variations of the title, Dark Planet Video, Transmission _3, and even descriptions like Creepy Desolate Planet Video. Hours passed, but every link he clicked led to dead ends. Frustrated, Jake considered reaching out to someone for help, but who would believe him? His mind flicked back to the glitch, the glowing red eyes, and the ominous message that had appeared afterward. Suddenly, his computer's screen froze. The cursor stopped moving, and the entire display went pitch black. Before Jake could react, the screen flickered back to life, displaying an unfamiliar video player. The interface was unlike any platform he recognized. It had no controls, no timeline, and no visible source URL. On the screen, Dark Planet began playing again. The same barren landscape appeared, but this time, it was different. The camera panned slowly across the dark horizon, revealing jagged mountains and rivers of what looked like black sludge. Jake's stomach churned as the video seemed sharper than before, more detailed. He could almost smell the acrid air and feel the suffocating weight of the planet's atmosphere. Then, the glitches started. The screen distorted, and a new image appeared, a close-up of a humanoid figure standing in the distance. Its features were vague, as if shrouded in mist, but its glowing red eyes pierced through the darkness, staring directly at the camera. "Is it looking at me?" Jake whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. The figure raised its hand. For a split second, Jake thought it was waving, but then he noticed the hand was pointing directly at him. Jake's heart raced as the screen glitched again, and a string of text flashed across the screen. "Stop watching." Ignoring the warning, Jake leaned in closer. He had to know what was happening. The camera perspective in the video shifted, moving closer to the figure, and with every step, the image became more distorted. The sound of static grew louder, accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to come from all around Jake's room. Then, the screen cut to black, and the whispers stopped. Jake sat frozen, his breath shallow. A notification popped up on his screen. It was another message from the same anonymous account. "Why are you still watching?" Before he could respond, the message disappeared, and the Dark Planet video resumed on its own. This time, it was no longer showing the desolate landscape. Instead, it displayed Jake's own bedroom, captured in real time through his webcam. "No, no, no!" Jake muttered, reaching for the webcam and turning it toward the wall. But even as he did, the video continued to display the same feed, as if the camera hadn't moved at all. Suddenly, text appeared over the video feed, "You can't hide from us." Jake slammed his laptop shut, his pulse pounding in his ears. He stumbled away from his desk, his legs shaky. What the hell was happening? His breathing was uneven, and he felt a cold sweat dripping down his back. As he tried to calm himself, his phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number read, "You've seen too much. Watch again, and it will be the end." Jake's first instinct was to delete the message, but his curiosity and fear kept him from doing so. Against his better judgment, he reopened his laptop. The screen was still black, but the whispers had returned, faint and almost rhythmic. He connected a pair of headphones, hoping to hear the sounds more clearly. It was then that Jake realized the whispers weren't random. They were repeating a message over and over again. We are the transmission. We are the truth. His mind raced as he tried to piece it together. Transmission_3. The video wasn't just a random upload, it was a signal. But a signal from where? Or worse, from what? Determined to find answers, Jake opened a file recovery program, attempting to extract any trace of the video from his computer's memory. To his surprise, he found an encrypted file buried deep within his system. Its name was a random string of numbers and letters, but the file size matched that of a typical video. Jake's hands trembled as he attempted to open it. The screen went black again, and this time, a distorted face appeared. It was humanoid but stretched unnaturally, its eyes glowing faintly as it stared at him. The voice that followed was layered, almost metallic. You were warned. You cannot undo what you have started. Jake froze, his mind blank with fear. And then, just like that, the screen returned to normal. The file was gone. Whatever this video was, it wasn't just data on a server. It was alive, and it had targeted him. Jake felt his resolve harden. If this thing wanted to mess with him, he was going to fight back. Jake wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge, even if it came from something that felt otherworldly. After the cryptic warnings and the horrifying realization that Dark Planet was more than just a video, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The whispers, the glitches, the haunting images, they weren't random. They were deliberate, targeted, and meant to elicit fear. But fear alone wasn't going to stop Jake. His first move was to fortify his system. He disconnected his laptop from the internet, booted it into safe mode, and began running diagnostics. Whatever had embedded itself into his computer had to leave a trail, and Jake was determined to find it. As he combed through his system files, he found a strange folder buried deep in his hard drive. It was labeled Transmission_3, a name that sent a shiver down his spine. The folder contained hundreds of encrypted files, each one with a timestamp that didn't make sense. Some were dated decades into the future, while others were marked with dates long before Jake was born. One file, however, stood out. It was named manifest.txt. Jake hesitated before opening it. His fingers hovered over the trackpad, a knot forming in his stomach. But his curiosity pushed him forward. The file opened to reveal a series of chilling messages. The signal must spread. Those who see will carry the burden. The planet is watching. You are now part of the transmission. Jake's pulse quickened. These weren't just cryptic warnings, they were instructions, or worse, a manifesto. What did it mean to be part of the transmission? He didn't have time to dwell on it. The longer he stared at the text, the more his screen began to glitch again. Letters from the file started rearranging themselves, forming new words. Run. The lights in Jake's room flickered. His computer screen went completely black, and the whispers returned, this time louder and more erratic. The sounds seemed to come from every corner of the room, even though his headphones were still plugged in. Jake yanked them off, his heart racing. Then, the screen lit up again, displaying a single, live video feed. It was his own face, staring back at him, pale and terrified. But something was wrong. In the feed, a shadow loomed behind him, tall, distorted, and motionless. Jake spun around, but his room was empty. When he looked back at the screen, the shadow was gone. Enough of this, Jake muttered, his voice shaky. He knew he couldn't handle this alone. He grabbed his phone and called his friend Ben, a fellow tech enthusiast who thrived on unraveling digital mysteries. Ben answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Jake? Do you know what time it is? I don't care, Ben. I need your help. Something's wrong with my computer. I think it's a virus, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Ben sighed. All right, send me the files. I'll take a look. I can't. It's not that simple, Jake said, glancing nervously at the screen. This thing isn't just on my computer, it's alive. It's messing with me. There was a long pause on the other end. Alive? Are you hearing yourself right now? Ben, I'm serious. Just come over, okay? I'll show you. Reluctantly, Ben agreed. When he arrived an hour later, Jake wasted no time explaining everything. He showed him the folder, the messages, and the live feed that had appeared on his screen. Ben frowned as he examined the laptop. This is weird, I'll admit. But it's probably just some elaborate malware. Let me run a deeper scan. As Ben worked, Jake paced the room, his anxiety mounting. The whispers had stopped, but the oppressive feeling in the air remained. He glanced at the window, half expecting to see glowing red eyes staring back at him. After what felt like an eternity, Ben leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Jake, this isn't malware. I don't even think this is from Earth. Jake froze. What are you talking about? Ben turned the laptop toward him, showing a series of code strings he had decrypted from the folder. This isn't written in any programming language I've seen before. It's alien. The syntax, the structure, it's like it was designed for something beyond our understanding. Before Jake could respond, the screen glitched violently. The Dark Planet video began playing again, unprompted. This time, it was different. The landscape was no longer barren. Instead, massive structures rose from the ground, dark, monolithic towers that seemed to pulse with a faint red light. The camera zoomed in on one of the towers, revealing intricate carvings that resembled symbols from the code Ben had just decrypted. The whispers returned, louder and more coherent, repeating a single phrase. The transmission spreads. Ben slammed the laptop shut. We need to destroy this. Whatever it is, it's not safe. But before they could act, Jake's phone buzzed again. Another message from the anonymous number. You cannot escape. The planet is here. As Jake read the message, a chilling realization dawned on him. This wasn't just about the video anymore. Whatever Dark Planet was, it had crossed into their world, and it wasn't going to stop until it consumed everything. Jake and Ben sat in stunned silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The room felt colder, darker, as if the presence of Dark Planet was leaching the energy out of the air. The phone's message, "The planet is here," felt less like a threat and more like a declaration. Whatever was happening, it wasn't confined to Jake's laptop anymore. Ben broke the silence, his voice a shaky whisper. Jake, we need to take this to someone who knows what they're doing. Cybersecurity, the authorities, anyone. Jake shook his head. They won't believe us. Think about it, what are we even going to say? That some cursed video is alive and coming for us? They'll think we're insane. Ben opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of static filled the room, silencing him. It wasn't coming from the laptop or Jake's phone, it was coming from the television in the corner. The screen, which had been off moments ago, flickered to life, displaying the same desolate landscape from Dark Planet. No! Jake whispered, his stomach dropping. The camera in the video panned slowly, revealing the towering monoliths they had seen earlier. The symbols etched into their surfaces pulsed faintly, as if alive. Then, the perspective shifted, moving closer to one of the structures. A door, or something resembling a door, was visible now, and it creaked open with an unnatural, echoing sound. The screen distorted, and suddenly, text appeared over the video feed. Welcome to the transmission. What the hell is this? Ben said, his voice rising in panic. Before Jake could answer, the TV screen cut to black. A moment later, it displayed a live feed of their living room, captured from an impossible angle. The camera wasn't just showing them sitting on the couch, it was moving, zooming in on their faces as if studying them. Ben stood abruptly. "We're unplugging everything. Now." He yanked the power cord from the TV, but the screen remained on, the live feed undisturbed. Jake grabbed his phone, frantically dialing 911, but the call wouldn't connect. Instead, the screen displayed an error message. "No signal. The planet is listening." The static grew louder, morphing into distorted whispers that filled the room. Jake clutched his head, trying to block out the noise, but it was everywhere. The whispers weren't just sounds, they were inside his mind, invading his thoughts. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, grabbing Ben by the arm. The two bolted out of the apartment, slamming the door behind them. The cold night air was a relief, but the oppressive feeling lingered. Jake's phone buzzed again. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't stop himself. The message was a single word. "Run." Jake and Ben exchanged a terrified glance before sprinting down the street. They didn't have a plan, they just needed to get as far away as possible. But as they ran, Jake noticed something strange. The streetlights above them flickered in unison, their light dimming as they passed. "It's following us," Jake said, his voice trembling. Ben glanced over his shoulder, his face pale. "How? It's not possible." They reached an all-night diner and stumbled inside, gasping for breath. The fluorescent lights and the hum of conversation from other patrons were a stark contrast to the chaos they had just fled. For a moment, it felt safe. They slid into a booth, their hands shaking as they tried to collect themselves. "We need to figure this out," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ben nodded, pulling out his own laptop. "If we can trace the source of the signal, maybe we can shut it down." Jake hesitated. "What if that's what it wants? Every time we interact with it, things get worse." Ben frowned but didn't respond. He opened his laptop, connecting to the diner's Wi-Fi. As he started typing, Jake's phone buzzed again. He braced himself and looked at the screen. The message was different this time. "You can't run. The signal is everywhere." Jake's hands trembled as he showed the message to Ben. "We're not safe here. It's already found us." Before Ben could respond, the lights in the diner flickered. The hum of conversation died down as patrons looked around, confused. The static noise returned, faint at first but growing louder. Jake's phone screen glitched, and then, without warning, Dark Planet began playing on every screen in the diner. The barren landscape filled the TVs behind the counter, the cameras showing new, horrifying details. The rivers of black sludge seemed to writhe, and faint, ghostly figures appeared in the distance, their movements unnatural and jerky. One of the figures turned toward the camera, its glowing red eyes locking onto Jake. It raised a hand, pointing directly at him. Then, text flashed across every screen in unison. "The transmission has begun." The other patrons screamed, some running for the exit, others frozen in fear. Jake and Ben ducked under the table, their hearts pounding. "We can't keep running," Ben said, his voice trembling. "We have to fight back." Jake nodded, though he had no idea how. Whatever Dark Planet was, it wasn't just a video, it was a doorway. And now that doorway was wide open. As the chaos unfolded around them, Jake made a decision. If this thing was going to come for him, he wasn't going to wait around. He was going to find it first. Jake's resolve was like a flickering flame in a storm, barely holding on against the overwhelming dread. The diner was in chaos, with patrons fleeing in terror as the screens played the cursed footage. The haunting figure with glowing red eyes still stared directly at him, unblinking, its hand outstretched as if beckoning him closer. But Jake wasn't running anymore. Whatever this was, Dark Planet, the transmission, the signals, it had chosen him, and now it was up to him to face it. "We need to go back to my place," Jake said, standing up from beneath the table. His voice was firm, though his hands trembled at his sides. Ben stared at him, wide-eyed. "Are you insane? That thing knows where you live. It's in your computer, your phone, your TV, it's everywhere." "Exactly," Jake replied. "It's already inside. If we're going to stop it, we need to go where it started. That laptop might be the only way to figure out what this thing wants." Ben hesitated but eventually nodded. "Fine. But if this gets any worse, we're calling for help. I don't care if no one believes us." Jake agreed, and the two of them pushed through the crowd, out into the cold night. The air felt heavier now, almost electric, as if the entire city were holding its breath. The walk back to Jake's apartment was eerily silent. No cars passed, no people walked the streets, and the usual city noise was absent. It was as if the world had emptied itself, leaving only the two of them and the oppressive presence of the transmission. When they reached Jake's building, they paused at the entrance. The windows of his apartment glowed faintly red, a sinister hue that hadn't been there before. "Whatever happens in there," Jake said, turning to Ben, "don't let it mess with your head. That's how it gets to you." Ben swallowed hard and nodded. They climbed the stairs cautiously, each step echoing in the silent hallway. When they reached Jake's door, he hesitated before opening it. The air inside felt colder, heavier, as if the space itself had been corrupted. The laptop sat on the desk where Jake had left it, but the screen was on, displaying the Dark Planet video. This time, the camera was moving toward one of the towering monoliths. The whispers were back, louder and more insistent, filling the room with an almost physical pressure. Ben approached the laptop slowly, his eyes scanning the screen. "Look," he said, pointing to the symbols etched into the monoliths. "They're changing." Jake leaned in, his heart racing. The symbols, once incomprehensible, were rearranging themselves into words in English. "Enter the gateway." As the text appeared, the laptop began to vibrate, the hum growing louder. Jake stepped back, his instincts screaming at him to run, but he forced himself to stay. "This is it," he said. "This is what it wants." Ben frowned. "What does that mean? Enter the gateway? How are we supposed to do that?" Before Jake could answer, the screen flashed, and a new message appeared. "You are the key." The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the laptop. Jake's chest tightened as the whispers grew deafening, forming fragmented sentences in his mind. "You opened the door. You let it in. The planet sees you." The video shifted again, showing a swirling black vortex at the base of the monolith. The camera moved closer, and as it did, Jake felt a strange pull, as if the vortex were reaching through the screen, trying to drag him in. "Jake, step back!" Ben shouted, grabbing his arm. But it was too late. The pull intensified, and suddenly, Jake's vision blurred. He felt weightless, like he was falling, but when he blinked, he wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was standing on the surface of Dark Planet. The air was thick and acrid, burning his lungs with each breath. The sky above was a swirling mass of red and black, and the ground beneath his feet was cracked and desolate. The monoliths towered around him, their surfaces glowing faintly with the same symbols from the video. Jake's heart pounded as he turned in circles, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this real? Was he dreaming? "Jake!" He spun around to see Ben standing a few feet away, his face pale with terror. "What just happened? Where are we?" I don't know, Jake admitted, his voice barely audible. But I think we're inside the transmission. The ground trembled beneath them, and the monoliths began to pulse, their light growing brighter. The whispers were back, louder than ever, echoing across the barren landscape. Jake and Ben stumbled forward, their eyes fixed on the largest monolith in the distance. Unlike the others, this one was completely dark, its surface absorbing the faint light around it. "We need to get to that monolith," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "That's where it all leads." Ben hesitated. What if this is a trap? What if going there is exactly what it wants? Jake looked at him, his expression grim. "It doesn't matter. We're already in this. The only way out is through." As they approached the monolith, the air grew colder, and the whispers became more coherent. They weren't just random fragments anymore, they were a voice, low and distorted, speaking directly to them. "You should not have come. The planet does not forgive. The gateway will consume you." Jake clenched his fists, refusing to let the voice intimidate him. Whatever this was, he wasn't going to let it win. When they reached the base of the monolith, they saw the vortex from the video, a swirling, inky black mass that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Ben stared at it, his face pale. "What now?" Jake took a deep breath, stepping closer to the vortex. "I don't know. But if this is the gateway, then maybe we can use it to shut this thing down." Before Ben could stop him, Jake reached out and touched the surface of the vortex. The world around him exploded into light and sound, and Jake felt himself being pulled deeper into the transmission. Jake's mind felt like it was being torn apart. The moment his hand touched the vortex, reality shattered. His senses were overwhelmed with blinding light, piercing static, and fragmented voices whispering in unison. He couldn't tell if he was falling, floating, or being dragged through the void, but the feeling was undeniable. He had crossed into something far beyond his understanding. When the chaos subsided, Jake found himself standing in a place that defied logic. The sky above him was not a sky at all but a kaleidoscope of shifting colors, constantly morphing into geometric patterns and alien symbols. The ground beneath his feet shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting images that were not his own, familiar places, strangers' faces, and even glimpses of the dark planet video itself. Ben stumbled beside him, gasping for breath. "Jake, where are we? What is this place?" Jake couldn't answer. He was too focused on the enormous structure looming ahead. It was a monolith unlike any they had seen before, far larger, its surface alive with pulsating lights and shifting runes. The air vibrated with an energy that made it difficult to think, as if the place itself was trying to infiltrate their minds. "The gateway," Jake finally said, his voice barely audible. "This must be the core of it all." Before Ben could respond, a low, guttural hum filled the air. The monolith seemed to react to their presence, the symbols on its surface rearranging themselves into words. "The key has arrived." Jake and Ben exchanged a terrified glance. "Key? What does it mean?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, but I think it's talking about me." The ground beneath them shifted, and the shimmering surface began to rise and fall like waves. The monolith's hum grew louder, and a figure emerged from the light. At first, it was hard to make out its shape, but as it stepped closer, it became clear it wasn't human. The entity was tall and angular, its body made of the same reflective material as the ground, but its form constantly changed, as if it couldn't decide on a single shape. Its face, if it could be called that, was a blank slate with glowing red eyes that burned into Jake's soul. "Jake," Ben whispered, backing away. "What is that thing?" Jake stood frozen, unable to look away. The entity tilted its head, studying him, before speaking in a voice that was both deep and otherworldly. "You have breached the veil. You have seen the transmission. Now you must choose." "Choose what?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. The entity extended a hand, and the space around them shifted. Suddenly, they were surrounded by images of Earth, cities bustling with life, forests swaying in the wind, oceans glistening under the sun. But as quickly as the images appeared, they began to distort. The cities crumbled into ash, the forests withered into barren wastelands, and the oceans turned into rivers of black sludge. "The planet you call home is fragile," the entity said. "Its survival is not guaranteed. The transmission reveals the truth: your reality is but one thread in an infinite web. And now that you have seen beyond, you cannot return unchanged." Ben stepped forward, his fear momentarily replaced by anger. "What are you talking about? Why us? Why show us any of this?" The entity turned its glowing eyes to Ben. "You were not chosen." "He was." Ben faltered, looking at Jake. "What? Why him?" Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't understand," he said. "Why me? What am I supposed to do?" The entity raised its hand again, and the monolith began to glow brighter. The symbols on its surface swirled, forming a new message. "The gateway exists to preserve balance. A sacrifice must be made." Jake's stomach dropped. "Sacrifice?" The entity nodded. "The transmission cannot be undone. It is a part of your reality now. But its influence can be contained, at a cost." Ben grabbed Jake's arm. "No. Whatever it's asking, don't do it. There has to be another way." Jake's mind raced. He didn't trust the entity, but deep down, he knew it wasn't lying. The things he had seen, the messages, the whispers, it all pointed to one conclusion. The transmission was spreading, and if it wasn't stopped, it would consume everything. "What kind of sacrifice?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The entity's form shifted again, becoming taller and more imposing. "The gateway must remain open, but it requires a guardian. Someone to anchor the transmission and ensure it does not spiral out of control." Ben's grip on Jake's arm tightened. "No. No way. There's no way you're staying here, Jake." Jake turned to Ben, his expression filled with both fear and resolve. "If I don't, what happens to Earth?" The entity answered without hesitation. "The transmission will spread unchecked. Your world will fall, as countless others have before it." Tears welled in Ben's eyes. "There has to be another way. Jake, please." Jake looked at the monolith, then at the swirling vortex at its base. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want any of this. But he also couldn't ignore the truth. "I can't let this happen to everyone," Jake said, his voice breaking. Before Ben could stop him, Jake stepped toward the monolith. The ground beneath him glowed, and the entity extended its hand once more. The air around them grew heavier, and the symbols on the monolith began to spin rapidly. "The choice has been made," the entity said. As Jake reached out to touch the monolith, he felt a surge of energy coursing through him. His body felt weightless, and his vision blurred. The last thing he heard was Ben's voice, screaming his name, before everything went dark. When Jake opened his eyes, he was alone. The monoliths stood silent, their light dimmed, and the vortex was gone. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Jake wasn't on Dark Planet anymore. He was inside the transmission. He could see Earth, but it was distant, like a memory. He could feel the pull of the gateway, the power it held, and he understood what he had become. Jake was no longer just a man. He was the guardian of the transmission. Jake floated in the void, suspended between worlds. Time felt meaningless here, an endless loop of fragmented memories and distant echoes. He could no longer feel his body, but his mind burned with the knowledge he had gained. The transmission was alive, an infinite network of realities intertwined and shifting, and now he was a part of it. Below him, Earth shimmered like a fragile bubble, its surface scarred with faint traces of the transmission's reach. Jake could sense the tendrils of the gateway reaching toward it, testing its boundaries, searching for weaknesses. It was up to him to hold them back, to contain the spread and protect the world he had left behind. But he wasn't alone. From the edges of the void, shapes began to emerge. They were twisted and jagged, their forms ever-changing, like shadows that refused to be pinned down. Jake recognized them as remnants of other worlds consumed by the transmission. They were the ghosts of failed guardians, beings who had been chosen to protect their realities but had succumbed to the overwhelming power of the gateway. Their voices echoed in his mind, a cacophony of regret and rage. "You will fail, as we did. The gateway cannot be controlled. The planet will fall, and you will be forgotten." Jake clenched his thoughts against the onslaught. "No," he said, his voice resonating in the void. "I won't fail. I'll do whatever it takes to stop this." The shadows laughed, their forms swirling closer. "You are naive, mortal. The transmission will break you. It always does." Jake ignored them, focusing his thoughts on the gateway. He could feel its pull, the immense energy coursing through it, and he realized that he could manipulate it. He wasn't just a guardian, he was connected to the core of the transmission itself. Summoning all his will, Jake reached out, commanding the tendrils of the gateway to retract. The void trembled as the shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness. For a moment, the silence was deafening, and Jake felt a surge of hope. But then the monoliths reappeared. They stood in a perfect circle around him, their surfaces glowing with symbols that pulsed in unison. The largest monolith, the one he had touched across the gateway, shimmered, and a familiar voice echoed in his mind. "The balance has been restored, but the cycle is not complete." Jake frowned. "What cycle? What are you talking about?" The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, the monoliths began to shift, revealing glimpses of other worlds. Jake saw planets teeming with life, thriving civilizations, and breathtaking landscapes, but he also saw destruction. He saw worlds consumed by the transmission, their inhabitants twisted into grotesque forms, their skies darkened by the spreading corruption. "The gateway exists across all realities," the voice said. "It cannot be destroyed, only contained. But containment requires sacrifice." Jake's heart sank. He had thought his sacrifice was enough, that by becoming the Guardian, he had saved Earth. But now he realized the truth. The gateway wasn't just targeting his world. It was spreading across countless dimensions, and his role wasn't to stop it entirely. It was to keep it at bay for as long as possible. "How long do I have?" Jake asked, his voice heavy with despair. The monoliths pulsed in response. "Time is irrelevant. The transmission is infinite. You will remain until the next key is chosen." Jake felt a crushing weight settle over him. He was trapped, a prisoner of the gateway, bound to an endless cycle of containment and decay. But even as the despair threatened to consume him, he thought of Ben. He thought of Earth. "I'll do it," Jake said, his voice steady. "I'll hold it back. But I won't let it take everything. There has to be a way to fight this, to warn the next Guardian." The monoliths dimmed, their symbols rearranging themselves into a single word. "Hope?" With that, the void shifted again, and Jake felt himself being pulled deeper into the transmission. Earth was quiet again. The chaos in Jake's apartment, the diner, and the streets had faded as quickly as it had begun. Ben stood in Jake's empty apartment, staring at the blank laptop screen. The Dark Planet video was gone, as if it had never existed. But Jake was gone too. Ben felt a hollow ache in his chest. He had tried to stop Jake, to pull him back, but it wasn't enough. Now, all he had left were questions, and a terrible sense of guilt. He sat at Jake's desk, his eyes scanning the room for any clue, any sign of what had happened. That's when he noticed the faint hum coming from the laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a message in Jake's handwriting. Ben, if you're reading this, it means I succeeded, at least for now. The gateway is contained, but it won't hold forever. The transmission is still out there, waiting for its next chance. You need to be ready. Warn people. Tell them what happened here. And whatever you do, don't let anyone watch the video if it ever resurfaces. Ben's hands trembled as he read the message. Jake, what did you do? The screen flickered again, and an image appeared. It was Jake, standing in the void, surrounded by the monoliths. He looked different, calmer, more resolute, but there was a sadness in his eyes. Ben, the video version of Jake said, I don't have much time. The transmission is contained for now, but it's not over. This thing, it's bigger than anything we can imagine. It's not just a video or a signal. It's a force, a presence. And it's everywhere. The image crackled, and Jake's voice grew distorted. I'll hold it back for as long as I can, but you have to promise me something. If the transmission ever finds its way to Earth again, don't let it spread. Destroy everything if you have to. Don't let anyone else end up like me. The screen went dark, leaving Ben alone with the silence. He sat there for a long time, staring at the blank laptop. He didn't know how to warn people without sounding insane, but he knew he had to try. Jake had given up everything to protect the world, and Ben wasn't going to let his sacrifice be in vain. As Ben stood to leave, he heard a faint whisper. It was coming from the laptop, so soft that it was almost imperceptible. The key has been chosen. Ben froze, his heart pounding. He leaned closer to the laptop, his breath catching in his throat. The screen flickered, and for a split second, he saw the Dark Planet video again. Then it was gone. The transmission had begun anew.